Grids. In this video, we'll take a look at grids. In architectural drawing, a grid is a vertical reference plane. It is similar to a level, though instead of horizontal, it is a vertical reference plane. It gives reference to other objects that you have modeled in order to help not only you, but the contractor lay out the building. Let's take a look at how to create grids on your drawing. You can find the grid tool on the Architecture tab, Datum panel, and it is located right here. You can also type in GR for creating the grid. Before we create our first grid, I'm going to add 4 walls for reference. And now I'll type in GR for grid. You can see here, once you've invoked the grid tool, you will get a modified place grid tab. And in that tab, you can see there is a draw panel. And you can draw grids in several different ways. A straight line, arcs in 2 different ways, or you can pick elements on the drawing and create a grid from that element. And lastly, you can create a multi-segment grid line which combines any of these. Let's start with the straight line. Once you click that, you'll want to left click on the screen, move your mouse, and left click again, and you have created a grid. Once you've created one, you can continue on by typing GR and adding more, or you can select it and copy the grid. You can select it and use the array tool to create more grids. You can even mirror the grid, or you can just move the grid as well. Notice that as we were creating grids, Revit numbered them in order. Usually in architectural drawings, the grids that are vertical on the page are numbered, and the grids that are horizontal on the page will be with letters. To change the grid number to a letter, all we have to do is select the grid and select the 9 in this case, and add our A. Once we've done that, whether we copy the grid or create new grids, it will continue down the alphabet. And that is how you create rectangular grids. Once you've created the grid, you can go to an elevation and see that the grids are an elevation as well, because they are vertical. We can move or stretch the grid line by grabbing the grip that is located right there. When you're creating a grid, I just typed GR for the grid tool. Once you left click, you can draw this line in any direction that you wish. If you want to make it orthogonal, or straight up and down, or straight horizontal, you can hold down the Shift key and you can see that it will snap to the vertical or the horizontal. One thing I might suggest is once the grids are in place and they're where you will want them, you can select them all and pin them down so that someone doesn't come along and accidentally move them. You can see when I tried to move them, Revit gives us an error that says you cannot pin a moved element. I do this often. Let's take a look at how you can create different shapes of grids. If I type in GR, again for the grid tool, we can move our selection over to the Start in Radius Arc. And when we select that, you can see that you will left click on the screen, drag to another point, left click again, and now you can select whichever radius you want. Once you have the grid created, you can go ahead and modify that radius if you wish. If your building followed this radius and you needed grids that were concentric to this, Again, you can type in GR, and this time we'll pick the Pick Line tool, and we'll come over here to the offset, and we'll create an offset that will be equal to the distance that we want our grids offset, 10 feet. Now when we hover over the already created grid, you can see the dashed line is where the next grid will be placed when we left click. And we can continue that for as many grids as we like. The second to last grid tool that we'll look at is the Center Ends Arc. And this is a tool that will create an arc from the center. We'll left click and drag, and you can see how the grid will be formed from that center point out. When we left click again, that will be one end of the grid, and we can drag to where we want the other end of the grid to be formed. Doesn't have to be a semicircle, you can put it up here, and that is how you create that grid type. And again, we can use the pick line with an offset to create more grids from there. The last type of grid line that we'll learn how to create is the multi-segment. This tool is used when you have a grid line that doesn't follow either a straight line or a straight arc, that you want to combine the two. You can see when we selected the multi-segment option for grid tool, we get a new set of tools, and we have entered sketch mode. We know we are in sketch mode because we have the green check and the red X. The check we will use when we are finished with drawing our grid line and want to finish the sketch. We also know we're in sketch mode because when we start drawing, right now we're going to draw in a straight line, it will be a magenta line. I'm going to left click again, and now we have one line. If I were to finish the sketch mode now, that would be our grid. But maybe we want to add an arc to the end of this grid line, and that is what our grid is going to be. Once we've created the two and it is one continuous line, we can hit the green check mark and we get a grid. The Pick Line tool is not just for picking previously created grids to create a new grid. Let's get rid of all these. I have to unpin those, and now we can delete those. I'm using EE to delete. Back to my grid tool, GR. If I select the Pick Line tool, I can select a wall and it'll create a grid right on the face of that wall. Or if I zoom in, I can do the center of the wall. I normally don't use this tool, and I'll show you why. If I'm going to select the center of the wall, or even the face, Revit puts the grid right on the wall, even the ends. And now I have to spend some time stretching the grid out so it looks correct. And I usually find it easier if I just type in GR to line up my grid tool and drag it. And to me, that is much faster. Finally, let's take a look at the properties of the grid. Very similar to the level, if you select the grid, you can see over here the instance parameters. That would be only for this grid line. Let's create another grid right below it so we can take a look. If I select grid R, I can change the R to a T, and it'll only change this one. However, if I select the T and I go to the type properties, not the instance properties, if I go to the type, and if I change these, it will change all the grids. Go back to our example of red, hit OK, and you can see that not only these two changed red, but all of the grid lines turn red. And that is our lesson on grids.